All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our final installment of Spartan Talks for the 2020-2021 academic year. Some of you are familiar faces, and we just appreciate you being with us all year. We have a great lineup coming for the fall of 2021 that we'll be announcing over the summer. But we're pleased this morning to round out the 2020-2021 series with Professor David Schwartz, who teaches in geography. And Professor Schwartz will be talking today about the idea of the Arctic, specifically shipping in the Arctic. Just ship it or not? And he'll be breaking that down a little for us here in a little bit. So Professor Schwartz teaches here at Northampton Community College. He's the Adjunct Professor of Geography. And he teaches world geography, geography of America, and environmental sustainability. Outside of the college, he's the founder of Schwartz Spatial, which is a spatial research firm focused in the Lehigh Valley. And he is a cartographic contributor for water in Atlas by Guerrilla Cartography, and also serves as a docent for the Nature Nuture Center. Professor Schwartz holds his bachelor's degree from Columbia College in Chicago and completed his graduate work in geography with a focus on the Arctic at California State University at Long Beach. And he's also spent over 2 decades as an entertainment technician, and says that in addition to his interest in theater and in geography, he is an avid cyclist, photographer, and a lover of craft beer, pizza, and tacos. And so I will stop talking, and without any further ado, here's Professor David Schwartz.
Thank you, Sam. And I also heretically like both Sheetz and Wawa, so take that as you will. All right, I'm going to share my screen with you guys so we can just get started. Okay, so, and just fuss that into position, Wonderbar. All right, hail and welcome, everyone. So, shipping in the Arctic. It's a reality, it's happening. Just ship it, or maybe not, but either way, it's happening. So when we think of ships in the Arctic, it's something like, well, natives utilizing the marine, ice-covered marine environment to do things like hunt for seals. Research expeditions. This is Mosaic, the kind of not really ill-fated. They managed to squeeze out a success ice research mission that started just before COVID and just recently finished. And of course, every so often, something goes horribly wrong, and that's what we hear about. This is the MV Explorer that went down actually in Antarctica. Ice-hardened vessel struck a piece of underwater ice and, well, started capsizing. But fundamentally, it's the lone vessel in a sea of ice valiantly pushing its way through. But that's changed, and it's changed for a good reason. The Arctic's warming. Yes, this is a single snapshot. It's not a trend analysis. My apologies, but I like the image. And the image just, this is January 2nd this year, and there's 86-degree weather in Siberia. That's not normal. Also, similarly in Canada. This warming has increased what we call the melt season. The counterpart to melt season is the freezing season, or the period of time when the sea ice actually freezes over, and any sea ice from the prior year adds additional thickness and depth, becoming much stronger. Just as a point of reference, ice is more or less kind of, it's not as salty as the water around it. It is still saltwater ice, not freshwater ice, but it's multi-year ice is like steel. It really will do a number on a vessel if you happen to hit it. So the start of the melt season is, of course, increasing to, well, closer to May 31st. And the end of the melt season is pushing further and further back to mid-October at this point in time, which more or less matches some estimates made about 10 years by the Canadian Coast Guard that we were adding 2 weeks onto the shipping season from about 1980 to 2000. So, and of course, the extent of it. This is 1980. Based on our satellite imagery. Look how it touches the coastline of Russia and very deeply involved in the Northwest Passage. But over time, it doesn't always touch. That touching is called landfast ice, ice that bonds to the coastline. It actually adds a really nice padding if you have to live on those coastlines and suffer the storms that come in the Arctic. because it gives you some distance, keeps the waves pushed off. But this landfast ice is starting to go away, and it's shrinking closer and closer to the center of the Arctic. But note, it's still touching Canada and Greenland, and you have that wide open edge all around. This has some implications as we go forward. Also, lastly, volume is decreasing. Volume, thickness, close enough, but basically the averages from the 1979 to 2020 is that black line on the image on the left. Everything in the last 10 years is below that line. There is some debate that it should be 1979 to basically 2020, or not so 2020, 2000, because by 2000 you're starting to see real Arctic warming going on. So it actually, it's by extending forward to 2020, it skews it a bit. We can also see ice thickness going from a low, well, the top line is the 1980 line, going from about 2 meters, roughly 6 feet, all the way on average up to about 2 3/4 meters, or about 8 feet. Of course, this is averages. This could mean also very places where it's really thin and places where it's 9 to 12 feet thick. It does get thicker. And that thickness allows you to do things like drive trucks over it. But it also makes shipping really difficult. So when the ice decreases, all this makes shipping and operating in the Arctic easier. Not easy, easier. And that opens opportunities. So really quick, I'm going to go over an example of the routes. So there's basically 4 flavors. We have destinational shipping. As you can see, this outlines probably what will be a cruise ship going to Nuuk, or a small hull container vessel going to Nuuk, which is the capital of Greenland, where also the main port of Greenland, bringing commercial consumer goods and the like there. Then you have intra-Arctic, going off Reykjavik in Iceland. That might be a marine survey vessel or a cruise liner exploring the coastline of Greenland and then heading back to Reykjavik. Then you have the blue line, trans-Arctic. This is ships using this as a shortcut, going from the Atlantic to the Pacific or the Pacific to the Atlantic. And last is something called cabotage. No, not sabotage, cabotage. I'm going to give us a quick example of this. This is Canadian style cabotage. It can also be a tug towing barges, but the thing to note here is the ship carries its own equipment. This is what we call, or what the Marine services call, a self-unloader, meaning it carries the material to unload itself, because a lot of Canadian ports, river ports, oceanic ports, don't have infrastructure. They might have a dock where you can tie up to a vessel like this up to, but it's not particularly heavy duty. It's not like going to the port of Newark or the port of Long Beach, the port of LA. These places where it's mainly a flat spot for you to stick containers and then pick up the containers from last year with maybe trade goods going back to the southern regions or not, though shipping companies like to move full containers. Also note that the green section, that tells you this ship is running really high and it's not particularly heavily loaded. These containers are probably fairly sparse, equally distributed, heavy ones on the bottom, but they're not too heavy. This looks like maybe about 3 dozen containers, which is very different from larger container ships. Now, that long distance travel, using this as a passageway, well, that's one of the things that's really changing. We're starting to see use of these various regions. In red, we have the Northwest Passage. This is the classic passage that's the shortcut around North America to Asia, basically. And for centuries, people tried to find a way through it, and a lot of them died in the process trying. I recently read a really great book on the Franklin expedition. And no one actually succeeded until Roald Amundsen in about 1901. And then no one else tried again for about 30 to 40 years. Because by that point in time, the Panama Canal existed. The blue line, the light blue line, is the Northern Sea Route. This passes across the top of Russia, threading its way through those islands, but there's a smaller number of islands across the North Arctic coast of Russia compared to the Arctic coast of Canada. And the green route is kind of the holy grail. This is called the Trans-Pacific Pathway, the Trans-Arctic Sea Route. There's several names for it, but it's basically the straight line across the top of the world, if you believe north to the top, passageway from the Atlantic to the Pacific and back again. Open ocean, no coastal areas, no threading your way through islands, right there. That's the one that doesn't exist yet because the center of the Arctic is still frozen. Now, why are these alternatives appealing? I mean, there's got to be a reason for people to want to put cargo vessels through Arctic waters that, even while they're warming and not as ice covered as before, still are not exactly untreacherous. Well, for the Northern Sea Route, it's basically 18 to 20 days from roughly Hamburg to Shanghai. To go the other direction, through the Strait of Gibraltar, through the Suez Canal, through the Indian Ocean, down the Strait of Malacca, up to the South China Sea, that takes 28 to 30 days. So it's a saving of about, it's basically 40% less. It's 40% shorter. And if you're shipping goods, moving goods by vessels, time is literally money, because every time that ship is moving, it's burning fuel, and fuel has dedicated costs. Also, crew costs, since the crew are officially working when the vessel is in motion. I'm not entirely sure what happens when they get to dock. For the Northwest Passage, they put this one of Shanghai to New York City. So instead of coming through this and going to Europe, it's actually passing through the Bering Strait and then cutting across the top of North America down to New York. The estimation here is to 30% less distance to cover. So that's also on the scale of roughly 10 days as well, while the other one can be as little as 10 days and a little bit more. So, and that's the thing, people are using these areas. Here's the Northern Sea Route. This is transit passage, not people doing destinational shipping, but people using this as a way to get from one side to another. And we've got it broken down by vessel type. We've got it broken down by what direction they're going. We have several aspects in play. But here's the thing. 1.2 million tons of cargo. That's not a great deal. That's not what goes through Panama on a weekly basis. That's much less than what probably goes through Panama on a weekly basis. But that is still twice as much on average for the prior 5 years. And they go from roughly 37 vessels doing this cross shipping to that 64 vessels. So interest is building, interest is present. And we can see various kinds of goods moving across. Those green lines going from Nunavut all the way west, that's the Mary River iron mine. Very high quality, I think 78% purity iron ore, so it's considered very good iron ore. And you can see for the most part, it's traveling across the Northern Sea Route and winding up in China. You can also see shipping out of Rotterdam and Murmansk, heading to points like Vladivostok, but also Shanghai and Qigan, Taijin, and Dalian, and all the way down to the port for Saigon, Phoi Mai. So you can see this is already starting to get embedded into the global scheme of international shipping. But that's not the bulk of it. The bulk of it is destinational. In this case, starting in the Arctic, Sabetta. Sabetta is the location of a huge number of Russian natural gas plants. We'll get to that in a moment. But look where the Russians are moving, and the Russians have to move this on their own because of certain laws in place. They're moving this stuff eastward to China, to Japan, to South Korea, to Taiwan. They're moving it westward to Scandinavia, to Central Europe, to Western Europe. This is now part of an incredibly interconnected system, and 254 shipments. That's a lot, and that's kind of constant. I will say one of the things that when you talk to Arctic researchers, this traffic in the Northern Sea Route is sometimes seen as not a positive in the sense of studying the region because it's so massive compared to transiting traffic. It kind of blows the number out of proportion a bit. And it then makes it sometimes seem like there's a lot more traffic operating, generally speaking, in the region versus this very specific LNG, liquefied natural gas focused traffic, being in many ways the bulk of the traffic in the region. The Northwest Passage does get some love, more metaphorically speaking, as well. Overall, the number of unique ships have increased from 112 to 160. I will say this is one of those differences. Russians will have a hard time telling you about the number of individual ships. Sometimes they do, sometimes they just tell you the tonnage. It depends on the year. But from 112 in 2013 to 160 in 2019, which is 44% increase. So we're seeing increases here as well. Meanwhile, distance sails gone up from 2.98 million nautical miles to 6.17 nautical miles, or 107% increase. This is telling you, and I have to wonder if it's what's heavily influencing this number is the Mary River iron ore shipments, because that's a big amount of traffic for the region. But this is telling you that this increased number of vessels are traveling longer in the region. I don't know how much of that's Mary River, but a good chunk of that's Mary River. Now, is it all of the increase? Possibly not, because there's more going on there. Now, one thing to note is on the right, is the Northwest Passage. These are what are considered the main routes. On the left is actual usage in 2019 of these routes. Note that southernmost route is being optimized. And some aspects of that southern route are fairly shallow. 8.9 meters, roughly 9 meters, is about 27 feet. That's pretty shallow for the largest vessels in the region. 10.3 meters is roughly 33 feet. 20 meters is roughly 60 feet. So the most heavily used portion has some of the shallowest waters, and that deeper water is not in play as much. Why? I shouldn't have been down there, but oh well. Note where that ice pack rests on this. It's basically blocking a good deal of that opening that would take you through the deepest route. In many ways, the Northwest Passage is not fully open. It's still a fairly limited shipping route. And this has impacts. This is actually part of what prevents the Northwest Passage from being a fully exploitable maritime route. So in many ways, that shallowness is what's putting off people from using the Northwest Passage pretty intensively. Some people are using it for very specific purposes, but by and large, not so much. And that's why, in many ways, that Trans-Arctic Seaway in green is really the most desired sea route, because you don't have to deal with those shallow depths. I want to take a slightly whimsical side. The Ever Given. We all remember that. 6 days, $54 billion in global trade lost. Yeah, pretty unfortunate. And with that being said, there was some deserved snark. Yeah, they're stuck, haha. And yes, come on, laughing at misfortune is very human. However, with all this, Rosatom actually, the Russian managing agency for the Northern Sea Route, yes, there's a Russian managing agency for the Northern Sea Route, basically threw that thing out as the gift that it is, threw out a couple other things, sort of laughing at the Ever Given, and then finished it off with, you know, it'd be great if there was another route we could use to get from east to west and back again. What is it? Oh yeah, the Northern Sea Route. Please try us out. And roughly the same point in time, Acre Arctic, which actually is a Finnish manufacturer of icebreakers, came out with an application saying, hey, we're designing an icebreaking Arctic container ship to go with those icebreaking Arctic LNG tankers, liquefied natural gas. maybe there's something to this. Hey, talk to us. We'd love to work with you. And there's something that's interesting, but however, there's some context issues in play. First of all, the Northern Sea Route's not a perfect route in its own right. Some of the straits that traffic must move through, especially when the central Arctic is more frozen, can get as shallow as about 8 meters, 25 feet. In 2018, the Maersk company put the MV merchant vessel Venta Maersk through the Northern Sea Route to test the idea of putting a container ship through the Northern Sea Route. All right, great. It's not a huge one. It's a 3,500 TEU. TEU is 20-foot equivalent unit. That's the size of an average container. But it had an 11-meter draft. That means it's too deep to go through some of these shallow areas. So they reduced the capacity to 600 containers from 3,500 containers to make sure it could ride high enough to get through those shallow points. And for reference, the Ever Given, that gigantic vessel, which is about as big as container ships get these days, is a 20,000 TEU shipping container ship, and has a 14-meter draft. Right now, ships of that size can't get through. That's the other reason that a lot of shipping companies or container ship companies are kind of waiting. There's been official statements by a lot of these smaller shipping companies, but Maersk and COSO, the two big ones, have basically been mum. They've tried it, they tested it through the Northern Sea Route and went, okay, we're going to hold our cards close to our chest and just wait and see what happens. But this is why I say the thing that really notifies something's rapidly and massively changed in the region is when you see an Ever Given sized container vessel carving through the central Arctic in the middle of summer. That will tell you something has incredibly changed. Right now, they're holding off because the Northern Sea Route and Northwest Passage are suboptimal. They're great for bulk carriage. They're great for liquid carriage. Containers, not really. But moving goods to the region is the only thing that matters. There's this. 2008, United States Geographical Survey put out the hydrocarbon survey and basically pointed out where most likely oil and gas would be found. I'm just going to try to do this. I don't entirely like these maps. There's a lot of white land that's actually supposed to be the dry land, and it's so unremarkable compared to a lot of stuff. A lot of the coastlines get messed up, but that's Alaska right here, Greenland, Scandinavia, and oh yeah, the Yamal Peninsula. And this is the Barents. So, yes, pardon my horrible drawing, but knock that out. So the survey came out. They basically did a very extensive geological survey of the region and realized there's some portions that we seem to be really great places to find hydrocarbons, natural gas, and oil. In addition to those maps showing where the actual things are, the one in blue is the probability map. And I find this interesting because the probability map, well, it's flipped around 180 from the other map. If you know your geography well enough, the North Slope of Alaska is a good point. Oh, look, there's already a lot of extraction happening on the North Slope of Alaska. What's another good point? Oh, yeah, that portion of Canada just near the North Slope, basically across the Alaskan Yukon border. That's also a great place that's already actively being used for oil and natural gas extraction. Great. Oh, look to Russia. There's the Yamal Peninsula in Western Siberia. Yep, that's also a really great place to go looking for stuff. The big revelation from this was, as much as saying, look, there's oil out there, there's oil and natural gas out there that's close to you guys already. You just need to go out and find it. This isn't going into the Central Arctic. In fact, if you look at the Central Arctic, there's basically nothing. But everything else, those coastal waters, yeah, you got something maybe. You should go look and see if you got something and see what you have. And the Russians have done it in a huge way. The Yamal Peninsula has been extracted heavily by two operations. Good old Gazprom, the old state-controlled gas company of Russia, but also a new one called Novatek. And Novatek has Yamal and G and Arctic 1, 2, and 3. Gazprom has a lot of other ones, but you can see there's gas fields that have yet to be exploited in this area. So there's room to expand, and expanding is what they're doing. But already, 50 million tons of LNG have been extracted by March 26th of 2021. These plants went online in 2019. 2 years. 2 years, 50 million tons of natural gas. Sorry, 3 years, my apologies, it was actually 2018. Because in 2020, it produced 18.8 million tons just for the year. Not huge. I mean, it's 5% of the entire global production, but that's pretty sizable in its own right. I'm almost done. So when you see this, the context is there's a new, very nice source of liquefied natural gas, and they're shipping it. And they're moving it across the world because the interest is there. But wait, there's more. Fishing. Yes, the Arctic is a place you can fish. Let's be completely honest. A lot of native folks have utilized the region for extracting maritime resources, things like fish, whales, seals, and of course, seabirds. This is part of their diet. This is part of their culture. But a lot of those waters are already covered. They're already covered by territorial waters and exclusive economic zones where countries already, thank you, bye-bye, have already basically have claim on this stuff. But the Central Arctic, that's wide open. So as of 2017, 16-year ban put in place on fishing the Central Arctic. You kind of can't do it right now, so it's not a huge demand. But the marine life in the area is changing. More southern species are moving further north because they want colder water. And at this point in time, they can still find the coldest waters in the Arctic. So we're having codfish moving up, and walleye and flounder and all those lovely, lovely fish we like to catch and eat. So many different kinds of fish like that. But in addition, there's also other resources in the area. So what we have here is actually one moment of everyone getting together and saying, okay, hold on. Let's not do this until we know what's going on there. And after 16 years, or at this point in time, 12 years, if no one objects to expanding it, it automatically renews for a 5-year turnover. And it will keep going for at 5-year increments until one country stands up and says, okay, we've done enough. Let's figure out how, let's actually do something. Because right now they're just trying to study what's going on here. But the other one is cruises. Yeah, people are going up here. Quark Expeditions, the other one is, I don't remember what the other one is offhand, but it's a Canadian company. We did not put the logo blatantly across the top of the page, sadly. But these are places, people are going up to see this stuff. So by and large, small cruise vessels, 200, 300 people, not huge ones, except for the time when the Crystal Endeavor was operating in the region for 2 years. And that was a 1,700 person vessel that a lot of Coast Guard people had palpitations over, just on the grounds that if that thing got in trouble, there was no way they could save even half the people on it. It was just that bad because there's not the kind of vessels needed. Pretty much you need another equivalently sized cruise vessel to come in and assist when that vessel gets in trouble. Oh yes, Royal Caribbean's also in it on it, and Crystal Cruises and Hanseatic and so many other companies. You could argue that this is maybe extinction tourism, and some people have argued that we're basically last chance to go see a polar bear before there are no more polar bears, though that's a kind of open thing. But go see all these animals before the environment completely changes and you don't get to see this anymore. And there has been research watching these vessels moving up and down through the Arctic, especially the Canadian Arctic, following the ice edge as it retreats, advances, but then retreats even more. And last and final thought, oil breakdown price. Why is this important? This tells you how valuable oil is. Note onshore Middle Eastern oil, $27 a barrel. That's cheap. That is really cheap. Meanwhile, Arctic is past all the deep water stuff, past the Canadian shale oil, past the oil sands oil, and all the way at the end where it varies between $90 a barrel and $50 a barrel, depending on where in the Arctic you are. But this is going to change. As these operations open and more shipping moves into the area, able to extract larger quantities, moving back to market, these numbers will drop. And Arctic oil is pretty good. So expect that price to change. All right, I think I have blitzed through as fast as I can.
Well, thank you, Professor Schwartz, for that presentation. And I had the opportunity of hearing that recently with when he was speaking as part of our environmental symposium here at the college. And it's always nice to kind of get a refresher on this. So at this point, we'll move to a period of questions and answers. So if you have any questions, please submit them into the chat. And then I will present those questions to Professor Schwartz. So if you have any questions on anything he covered, please go ahead and type that into the chat. And as you do that, for a early question, I think that's on a lot of people's minds, Professor Schwartz, is that you talked about shipping in the Arctic. You said, listen, it happens, that this is something that is just it. If there's a waterway, there people are going to try to find a way to use it. As well as to your point, some people go up there to see the Arctic. You also talked about climate change. Does the amount of shipping through the Arctic, is that accelerating climate change? Is that accelerating the melting of the ice?
There's a serious concern that it is. One major maritime fuel is called heavy fuel oil. It's actually not too dissimilar from the stuff you put in. If any of us, like me, have an oil burner furnace, it's actually not too dissimilar. It's actually a few grades heavier than that. It's very sooty. So when it's combusted, you actually has black carbon is created. And this floats out and then doesn't get very far. They're very large particles. They're only there's about 10 microns across. So they don't have a lot of airborne. They're not great travelers, let's put it that way. But they settle on the ice around these vessels or near these vessels, and that darkens the color and permits melting to accelerate. By and large, as a major factor for anthropogenic climate change, not really, only because of sheer quantity. Once other factors are applied, once we're talking about these ships going through in thousands per year instead of hundreds per year, then you can start saying, okay, something's going on there. But the International Maritime Organization is also changing the rules on Arctic vessels and requiring them to no longer use heavy fuel oil. The question is, what do they use next? Natural gas, propane, something different? It's kind of an open field right now.
Professor Patra has a comment here. He says, in terms of thermodynamics, melting ice cannot be without consequences.
Oh, yeah. I mean, no argument there. Yeah. I mean, get rid of sea ice, make it more accessible. It will just move. I mean, people will use it. There's space. People will go in. And come 2040, 2050, that's the estimate when basically the Central Arctic will at least be open during the summer. Expect some people to start testing the waters, metaphorically speaking, and running container ships and larger vessels through the Arctic. I mean,
the other question he has here is, he says, looks like the magnetic north is also moving.
Yeah.
You want to expand on that a little bit?
I can try. That's not really my bailiwick. The magnetic poles of the Earth are not stationary. They shift around. And yes, every so often they flip. And yes, we have no idea what's going to happen when they do that, but it's probably nowhere near as catastrophic as a lot of people seem to think. Only because, well, life's still on this planet. We don't have these every 50,000 years dents in the number of living creatures on the planet. So that's my 2 cents.
All right, question here. Do you think the Arctic will ever become fully melted?
At this rate, yes. I hate to say it, but yes, I really sincerely hoped it would not by the time I got to this point, but There's really no way looking around it, and it seems to be accelerating its rate of shrinkage. And hence why by 2040 we might see something. Might see a central Arctic that's basically empty. We might still see winter ice there for decades to come, but ice surviving from one year to the next might happen on occasion, but don't bet on it.
And a follow up to that, what is, I mean, we always hear about climate change. And I think one of the challenges of it becomes the idea of not in my backyard, right? The idea that, well, if it doesn't directly impact me in my everyday life, then, so everyone is, no one cares about the Middle East until it's someone that going over there for war, or your oil prices go up. I imagine it's similar with the Arctic. What is significant about, like, what are the significant impacts if that ice cap melts?
So if that ice cap melts, and maybe more like saying when that ice cap melts. Just as a side note, for those of you who are like, well, okay, what happens if we basically cease outputting carbon dioxide tomorrow globally? We somehow magically accomplish that. Thermal inertia will guarantee we continue on this course for at least a century to come. So, big complex system, lots of inertia. And yes, methane release and more water vapor in the atmosphere due to surface warming, due to evaporation. Yeah. But to say your question, Sam, honestly, it's the fact that things can be done faster. Once you can go through these areas faster, suddenly the interest is really there. And it's just because, hey, look, we can do this. It might take a long, long time before it's like really solidly something that, oh, the Suez Canal and all that have now slowly faded because we have this now. It might take a while to get to that. But honestly, at this point in time, I'd say look at that as a high probability certainty.
Okay. Other question here. Do you think it is the most difficult, or what do you think is the most difficult and need to be careful either to ship from the Arctic region to other countries?
At this point in time, oil. Because, okay, everyone here probably remembers Deepwater Horizon and putting those booms out and putting layered booms out to basically stop oil from getting over, putting surfactants, love them or hate them, to disperse the oil. Even in a scenario where there's no consistent ice, you're still going to have pack ice, loose ice. How does that impact setting out containment booms? What happens if there's ice inside those containment booms? How much oil are they going to absorb? We've got a little idea because some ships have crashed, leaked oil from their tanks. Remember, they run on heavy fuel oil, which is in some ways not too dissimilar from crude, but not still pretty lightweight. So that's the biggest one, because cleaning that up is no big deal. LNG, I mean, that you crack an LNG carrier, the gas volatilizes because it's kept under pressure, it just turns into a gas that goes in the atmosphere. Yeah, it's releasing methane, but not really on the same level for at least immediate impacts in the area. But other than that, I mean, really, there's nothing else, unless for some reason people are moving shipments of like tetrafluorine or something, some obscure lethal chemicals.
Are you suggesting the cartels have not yet discovered the Arctic passageway?
Well, that depends on what you want to say. Russia is technically part of OPEC.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right, next question here. From one of our students, she says, I was told that polar bears would not necessarily die, but rather readapt and become black bears in places such as Canada. Do you think the bears are this intuitive, and how accurate do you think this idea is?
Bears are pretty smart, by and large. Of those of us who live around here in the more rural areas, you've probably interacted with black bears. They can be kind of clever. They can also be kind of skittish. But bears are fairly smart. I wouldn't say they turn to black bears only because the grizzly / brown bear populations are much closer, and they tend to freely interbreed with them. So it looks like, I would say more likely, a lot of polar bears would interbreed with grizzly bears, partly because they're also very close in size. Black bears are much smaller. I mean, I wouldn't put it past a polar bear that's really hungry enough to try to take on a black bear and eat it, just because it's not on the equivalent size. good-sized animals. They're not as big as a polar bear. Big question with polar bears, though, we don't know how many there are. Partially because we don't have real analysis across a vast swath of the Arctic. US Arctic, we have a good idea. Canadian Arctic, 90% solid. Russian Arctic, the Soviet Union did a good job. I mean, love it or hate it, they at least did some really good job in environmental sciences in that one limited aspect. And they got some good stuff there, but people referencing now what, 35-year-old data, that's not really something to go off. So, and of course, never be taken in by suddenly polar bears show up in Arctic City and they're breaking into people's houses. Oh, they must be fine. No, they want your food and your trash. They're incredibly opportunistic, which is why I don't see them dying. I see them adapting, but you're going to watch the population shrink and maybe only after a period of stability rebound in possibly some newer form. We may have to rewrite taxonomic journals over that.
A reminder to save the polar bears.
And everything else.
Another question here from one of our students. She says, good morning. I have a question regarding your thoughts on how this topic of the melting Arctic would affect other ecosystems, such as the seals, such as the seal sea, which we spoke about in geography with Professor West.
Oh.
How would it affect wind currents and so forth?
Good question. Some of it's going to be a big problem. Certain animals like to summer in the Arctic. That's where they breed. So migratory birds, for example, really like to, barnacle geese, snow geese actually summer in the Arctic. They winter where we are and head up north to summer. And that's where they breed. Are they able to find the same food sources in sufficient supply to basically continue using that area? I don't know the answer to that, but that's a question well worth looking into. Whales are moving further north because they're looking for the food animals that they tend to follow, which are also moving further north because of that. That's going to start putting large marine mammals into more conflict, possibly. We've done a real number on whale populations, especially Arctic whale populations. So it's a lot of, if someone wants to donate about $1 billion to Arctic biological research, it would be well worth it because we need people out there watching how this happens. And climatically, the big thing we're seeing is these polar vortexes coming south. Big, massive warm air up top pushes cold air away. And of course, you're at the top of the world, away is all points south, like here. So we go from, 40, 30 degree weather to 20, 10 degree weather, 2 feet of snow over 2 days or more. God, I remember 2010. And that's something we should be predicting to happen more often. Oh, and because all the oceans are warming, generally speaking, that's more moisture in the atmosphere and larger precipitation events. Beyond that, Anita actually, Foster would be a much better person to talk to about this stuff. She knows that side much better than I do.
And a follow-up question to that, is there enough acknowledgement in which policies are going to be made to stop or at least decrease these effects?
That's a great question. Really, at this point in time, it seems the bulk of the interest is on big solutions that kind of everyone participates in. So replacing hydrocarbon fueled vehicles, gasoline, diesel, with electric vehicles. So maybe not changing the power source, that already reduces emissions. Though I want to be completely honest, refining rare earths is also a highly polluting activity as well. It's well worth not ignoring because that's something that happens actually heavily in Mongolia. So, but other than that, it's really like, there's a great saying in geography: think global, act local. What are things you can do, your community can do, your country can do that makes sense for where you are? Not like big, huge things. Oh, they're doing this over here, we should do it over here. Well, does it make sense? Do the numbers support it? Does the data support it? Or are you literally picking everything from that and doing no studies from where you are? Got to think big, but also think small.
That's great advice. I think I recently moderated a candidates forum debate. Professor Schwartz was there specifically on this question, but it was with more local candidates. And that was one of the emphases, that the idea that sure, you could talk about international ideas and national policies in Congress, but the city of Bethlehem is not the U.S. Congress, and they're not enacting the same kinds of procedures. What specifically are we going to do in your local communities to make that place better? It's good advice. I'm going to actually cue in here Professor Keith Fallows from English. He had a question about the Russian military. And he's going to be better asking it than I am. So I'm going to let Professor Fallows ask that question.
Sorry about that. My camera fell. I can hear you loud and clear. Hello, Professor Dave and Professor Sam. I wanted to ask Professor Schwartz about Russian military presence in the Arctic, and specifically the Svalbard region, which they recently signed a treaty over with Norway. I know that's a polar bear region, and we're trying to save the polar bears here. Yes. And I know they signed a treaty, but people sign a lot of treaties, right? And different things happen. And if usually when history shows Russia gets angry, they tend to ignore treaties they've recently signed to send a message. And should they do that eventually, and I know they did have military drills as recently as this past March, geographically, that region, as you said earlier, is very oil rich and of interest to these the oil cartels. As far as avoiding conflict, I don't know if this is something anyone can really answer. It just seems that if Russia just does what it wants anyway, regardless of the risks of spilling oil in the region or hurting the region, I mean, what if you have an idea of a proper response besides sanctioning or something that to avoid conflict or not? I don't know. Just curious in the way Russia just keeps putting bases there, and I don't know really what anyone can do.
That's fair. No, it's totally fair. I'm actually not too familiar with what the Russians recently signed in Svalbard. I know them and Norway have been going back and forth over Svalbard for a while, and they've been wanting
years
to have more presence there. For everyone, Svalbard is, mind if I share a screen really quick? Svalbard is an island of Norway. And the thing about Svalbard is it actually doesn't really belong to anyone. It's kind of terra nullis, or no man's land in a weird way. So just for reference, and grab this because it's kind of, Svalbard is this collection of islands here. And the Norwegian government technically has most sovereignty over it, but technically they're on their own in so many ways. People can't be born there. You have to actually be moved off the island if you're pregnant. People can't die there. You have to move off the island if you're critically ill. It's a very, very odd, curious, strange situation. Now, the Russians and Norwegians are neighbors. I mean, right there, you can see it. They have had back and forth on this. The Russians have actually run coal mines on Svalbard. They've run, I think, some oil, attempted to explore for oil offshore or onshore. The Norwegians, for the most part, have done a little oil exploration themselves. They've done a lot of fishing, though. And so Svalbard has what's called a fishery protection area instead of an exclusive economic zone, but it's utilized the same way. It's a very funky arrangement. As to Russia as a whole, though, well, I like this map for one specific reason. Ignore the plot of colors in the middle. Russia, and I've talked about this, sees the Arctic initially as a place of security. Yes, since 1950, bombers could make their way across. From 1965 onward, missiles could be launched across it. But no one's going to do a land invasion from it. An ice-free Arctic is suddenly a place that is no longer secure. At the same time, it's also a place of incredible opportunity. So they're trying to walk this line. I like to describe Russian military expansion into the Arctic as securing the reaches, the distant frontier that basically prevents anyone from getting too close. Now, thanks to international maritime law, moving commercial shipping through that area doesn't count. It's all peaceful. Peaceful transit pretty much is wide open. And for the most part, the Russians just seem to go along with that. Will that change? Who knows? But at this point in time, they're basically saying, oh God, this is all empty and open. We need to secure this. Russia likes having buffer space. This is the reason why they have a freak out when Ukraine thought about becoming part of NATO, when Georgia thought about becoming part of NATO. With the recent election unrest in Belarus, there was almost a moment there where the Russians were going to send troops into Belarus to stabilize the situation. And they stopped just short of that. So they want not elbow room, but a defensive distance where they can stop things happening before they come too close. With that being said, as we all know, if you study military history, the best defense is a good offense. So why not have things like tactical missiles? Oh yeah, the IRBM treaty just went up, so everyone's down on that now. And this apparently new attempt for something like Project Pluto with a basically open cycle nuclear reactor powered strategic cruise missile. Yeah. And this nuclear torpedo that some people are getting heebie-jeebies over that supposedly can be used to like take out port regions without anyone noticing or something along those lines. I think it's a lot of the willies, so to speak, but man, it's really kind of hard. You don't want to start a war with them. At the same time, you don't want to roll over and just let them do what they're doing. So you have to walk that middle line. And sanctions, oh man, sanctions are hard. They're not always a great solution. A lot of what you could actually look at the Russian export of liquefied natural gas is actually against sanctions currently in place. It's just that they were based on Southern sources that were already developed, not these new sources that have become developed since the sanctions went into place. Oh, and the Chinese are happily funding this because they want energy. They want so much energy. And it's not just this, it's also Central Asia. So I am not a political scientist. I don't know what the magic answer is to this.
That was a great answer. That was much. I was worried my question wasn't fit for what you were saying, but you gave me all I wanted out of it. Definitely more than I expected. So thank you.
You're very welcome.
No, because I mean it ties in militarizing regions with polar bears and ice obviously can cause environmental worries, and as you said, shipping in the area, we're still trying to navigate that. So thank you very much, Professor Schwartz.
You're very welcome.
I heard that as militarizing polar bears first.
Russia would definitely militarize bears if they could, no doubt about that.
Oh, I agree. So, well, that is the time that we have here. We're just about at noon, and so we want to be respectful of your time, and of course of Professor Schwartz's as well. A quick note for those who've been with us all year: Professor Keith Fowler, you remember, gave our inaugural Spartan talk back in the fall of 2020, and here we are, some 10 talks later. And so, I just want to thank Professor Schwartz again for his insights today. I want to thank him for joining us. And for an incredibly important topic that I don't think a lot of us know a lot about. And so appreciate your insights today.
Absolutely. And for those of you who are interested in talking to me more about this and have questions, you can find my email through the Adjunct faculty staff directory, and feel free to shoot me a message. I would be happy to talk about this with any of you. Oh, thank you, Sam. So yes, D. Schwartz.
We just put his email in the chat. So feel free to email Professor Schwartz if you have any other additional questions.
Yeah, and let's talk about this. I'm interested in getting more interest in this because a lot of people sort of go, oh, there's this and there's this, but what about the rest?
Yeah, very good. So, well, again, thank you, Professor Schwartz, and thank you to everyone for joining us. That does conclude our talk today, as well as the Spartan Talks for the 2021 academic year. We will welcome you back in the fall of 2021, so be on the lookout for the new slate of talks coming into the next year. I want to wish all of you the very best, students who are taking your finals, professors who are grading finals. I want to wish all of you the very best as the semester rounds out. Stay safe, stay well, and we'll see you again in the fall. Take care, everybody.